Bravo 45 Alpha Charlie Papa channel. Here's the old gunsmith, and today we're going to talk a little bit about cleaning. That is a subject that everyone seems to think they know a little bit about, and some people think they know a lot about it. And there are so many different types of ways of cleaning that people use that is almost hard to get a handle on exactly how. So we're just going to cover the basics here. Rather than getting into some of the targets people and the other things they do, we're going to just do basic gun cleaning. Basically, after you have gotten back from the range and you want to clean your gun, there's several different things you have to do. There's three kinds of There are three ways of removing the fouling from the gun, and a couple of different things that you're actually removing. You may have leading in the gun. That would be if you were shooting lead bullets, and the rougher the bore, the more lead you will deposit in there. You might have the jacket material from regular jacketed bullets in there, and that's cupro nickel, and that needs to be removed also. That will build up and eventually ruin accuracy. And the third thing is the carbon and the residue from the powder burning. So those are the three elements of what you have in there, or may have in there, to clean out. And there's basically only about three ways of getting them clean. To remove any type of fouling, you can either scrub it out with an abrasive or a brush or something like that, or you can dissolve it, or you can penetrate under it and then lift it out. And those are about the only three ways. Now, depending on what you've got, almost any of your bore cleaners will take care of the powder fouling. They will dissolve it and wash it out, and that's not a problem. You get into a problem with your two metals. Lead is pretty much a substance that nothing's going to dissolve it except mercury. Mercury will take it out, but you can't use that, and it's not available any longer. So you have to look at, how am I going to get the lead out of the barrel? That's mostly on pistols, and we'll cover that a little bit later. Right now, let's talk about your typical rifle. What you will have in there, of course, is powder fouling, and you will have metal bullet jacket, unless you've used cast bullets, and then we could get into lead removal again. But anyway, you get your gun back. You're going to disassemble it by getting your bolt out. And then you want to, at every opportunity, you want to clean from the breech end. You want to go run your rod and your patches the same way the bullet runs. And the reason for that is you can actually cause wear, muzzle wear, from the rod. And a lot of people don't believe that. Now, let me show you something. I went and I bought a Remington rolling block that was sold to Egypt. And so this was from an Egyptian Remington rolling block in 43 Egyptian caliber. All right, this was the muzzle and the 4 inches at the end of the muzzle. And because it wouldn't shoot, and when I looked at it, I couldn't see any rifling. Let me see if I can. It looked like a smooth bore. So I cut it the long way after I cut it off the rest of the barrel at the bayonet lug. And as I opened it up, what I found, let's see if we can show either one of these to you. You can see the rifling here as it comes up towards the muzzle, and if you notice, that rifling disappears. It's gone. It's a smooth bore from here forward. This was cleaned from the muzzle so much that it actually wore the rifling out. This is the other half of the barrel. And you'll see the same thing here. You can see the rifling coming up, and right there it disappears completely. It's gone. So of course, that affected accuracy. Well, of course, the bullets came out and they tumbled. And so this happens if you clean from the muzzle aggressively and for too long. So Camp Perry back in the 80s, when I used to shoot competitively, I'd go over to the Rock Island Arsenal van, and they had 2 crackerjack mechanics in there, gunsmiths in there. Bruce Woodford was one of them, and Bruce would actually take on M1s and M14s, he would actually take the throat erosion gauge, and he would put it in the muzzle to show the guys that what they're doing, because you have to clean the M1 and the M14 from the muzzle. He would show them how much wear they had. And most of the guns didn't wear out from the throat where you would expect them to, but they actually showed enough wear at the muzzle that accuracy would start degrading and they would need to be rebarreled. But this is just an extreme example of what happens if you clean from the muzzle. In guns like the M1 where you have to clean from the muzzle, you want to use a bore guide. Get your rod started in the muzzle end, and then you will run this up so it enters the bore. It enters the bore and centers the rod so the rod does not touch the lands inside the bore. And now you can run your rod down and do your cleaning without worrying about damaging your lands and grooves. Or your lands actually go a long way before you get to your grooves, and by then it's not shooting anyway. So you want to always clean from the breech end when you can. When you can't, look at getting yourself a bore guide that will save that muzzle from wear. Now, the next thing you're going to hear is no matter who you talk to, they're going to have their favorite solvent. Frankly, I don't know that it really matters. I've tried a lot of them. I've used a lot of them. They'll all take care of the powder's residue. Every one of them. Whether it's the old Hoppe's number 9 or AccuBore or any of the other super cleaners that are out now, the Butch's Bore Shine, the Montana Extreme, there's a million of them. Pick your favorite and go ahead and use it. They'll all work to one degree or another. The ones that if you're shooting a lot of jacketed bullets, the important thing is to have something that will attack that copper that's in there. Sweet 762 and AccuBore and several of them are copper cleaners, and at least when I was shooting competitive, we used that a lot. We use that every day because you'd go out and you'd shoot an 80 round match and come back in and clean your rifle, and you'd do the same thing the next day. Most shooters don't shoot 80 rounds. Even when you go to sight your gun in before deer season, you're not going to shoot that much. But for us, it was very important to remove the built-up copper jacket material in the bore. Now, as far as procedures, we all know the basic procedures, and there will be some argument on it. Some people are just adamant that they know how to do this and nobody else does. But primarily, what you do is you want to get a patch that fits your bore size, put a patch on your jag, and there are several types of jags. There's the slotted jag. I like it because it holds on to the patch really well. Usually you'd like to get yourself a pipette like this. This is so that you don't dip your jag straight into the bottle, and that way you don't contaminate your bore cleaner in the bottle. You suck the bore cleaner up into the pipette. You put it on the patch, introduce the patch from the chamber end, and what you've basically done is you've coated the inside of the bore with the bore cleaner. Okay, you can see that I've gotten some residue out that way, and then it depends on the bore cleaner you're using as far as how long you let it sit. Some of them will tell you to let it sit for several minutes to work, and especially when you're working with copper jacket material. It's cupro nickel actually, but when you're working with jacket material from your regular bullets, you want to let it work and dissolve that because it's chemically trying to dissolve that copper. I use coated rods. These are Dewey. They're made with a plastic-like coating on them. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's slick. It doesn't transfer material from the bore back into the bore. You can just wipe it right off and it's clean. There's a lot of theory on what happens when you don't use a coated rod. The softer aluminum rods can embed material from either the jackets or from just material that's laying around on your bench, and put it in the bore, and a lot of people feel that's very destructive. I think you have to do a lot of cleaning to do very much damage, but nonetheless, one of the many, many theories on how to or not to clean a bore. There's also little things that will go in here that would be bore guides, would keep you from dripping any cleaner into the action itself. They're a good idea, but they are kind of gun specific. I've got 3 of them, and not one of them will fit this gun. So, you know, it depends on what you've got and how serious you are about it. So once you've got the bore cleaner in, next thing is whether you want to scrub the bore or not. Now this is, again, like everything to do with cleaning, can be quite controversial. For the average hunter, the guy who's going to go out and fire a few shots and shoot a deer and come home, this is gilding the lily. This is, you know, splitting frog hairs here. But some people will tell you never ever brush a bore. And I think if you've got a good, high quality, very well polished bore in a match rifle, there's probably some justification to that. If you're talking about a regular factory type barrel in a rifle, you may not, or if you don't have a perfect bore, you will want to put a bore brush in, and they tell you to take a stroke for every bullet you fired. If you fired 10 rounds, you want to take 10 strokes. This will clean any thing that is embedded into the rifling, both into the lands and into the grooves. After each pass, I like to take and wipe my rod off, just to make sure that anything that I've pulled out of the bore, I don't put back in the bore. Once you've taken and done as many strokes as you're going to, you want to switch back. The other type of jag you will find is a jag like this one. You have both the loop and you have a typical jag. Different people like different jags. I know several guys that much prefer this one. Personally, I like this one. To me, it holds the patch securely. But after you have brushed the bore, I would suggest you go back through it with another patch. So now you see that after we have put the bore cleaner down and we have brushed it, and then we follow it with a jag, we come up with material that was left in that barrel. So we're going to remove that, and we're going to repeat. Basically, I will normally not brush it more than once. I will just now put wet patches down the bore until I get them out clear. Now I suspect that we're going to get a number of people that are going to tell us this is all wrong. This is not how they do their guns. This is basic cleaning. This is not something that you would find guys that shoot competitively doing. They will take a lot of steps that we're not taking here. And if you notice, we have a little less. It's not quite as dark as it was the first time. And we'll simply continue that process until we get a clean patch out, and then we'll consider the bore clean. As you can see, in 6 patches here, we have taken it from really dirty all the way to almost perfectly clean. The trick with these old military rifles is you can probably spend the rest of your life here running patches down that bore, and you'll never get one out that looks like snow. You just won't. The little corners of the rifling are holding dirt that's been in there since World War I or before. So you can clean and clean and clean. You take it to the point that you're comfortable with. If that's not clean enough for you, just go right ahead. But rather than stay here the rest of the day showing you me running patches down the bore, we'll just say that's good. One of the products you might consider, this is really nice. You can take this in the field with you, is these bore snakes. They go under several different brand names, but basically they're all the same. They're caliber specific, and you can put these in your backpack or in your pocket if you're going to be out for a while and you want to clean in the field. You don't need a rod. This is a pull through. It has a brass weight on one end, a cord, and there is a brush here and a long section that will mop up any of the oil or whatever is in the bore. And all this takes is to take this, lower the muzzle so that you get gravity working with you. As long as you got gravity with you, you might as well use it. That was a joke, folks. These are the jokes. I'll be here till noon. And we feed this through here until it pops out the muzzle. Once the weight comes out the muzzle, you can just pull it, guide it into the breech end, and you will have a struggle pulling it through because it fits really tight. You're putting everything, all that material down the muzzle. You will have pulled this entire unit through the bore. There's a brush here, and all of this will have gone through to pick up any of the debris left in the bore, the fouling. And other than copper or something that's plated to the metal, it's going to be absolutely clean. They're very handy, they're very good, and without spending a lot of money and a lot of different equipment, this should do about everything you need if you're a hunter. If you're a target shooter and you're shooting a lot of rounds, you're going to probably want to go through the more elaborate process. Okay, from there, we would just go to lubrication. So there's as many different kinds of gun oils out there as there are manufacturers. And frankly, all of them work to one degree or another. All you're really doing is trying to prevent rust. And almost any coating, oily coating you put on it is going to work. I would suggest that, popular as this is, and as good as it is for a million things, it is not a good gun oil. I would say it's not a gun oil, because long term, this turns into grease. Here are a couple of butt plates, an old Mauser butt plate. I sprayed this with WD-40 about 6 weeks ago. As you can see, sitting here in my shop for 6 weeks, it has already started to turn into a grease. It's no longer an oil. It will, as time goes on, it will harden and harden and harden until one day you'll come and try and work the gun, and you will find that in cold weather the firing pin won't fall because this is thickened up. It's not that it isn't good for as a preservative or a lubricant. It's just the nature of the product that eventually it's going to turn into a gummy mess. So I would suggest you take your WD-40 and you use it for your car, and you use it for the door hinges that are squeaky and all the other things that you use WD-40 for. But one thing you don't do is use it on your guns. Same thing with this one. I sprayed this at the same time. As you can tell, nothing's running in here. It's all turning into a grease. It will, over time, get waxy and hard. Usually the bane of most gunsmiths' existence is when people bring a gun in and say, it won't work. It's not ejecting, it's not firing in the cold. Very often it's a problem of using too much oil. You do not need to drench this thing in oil. You need a couple of drops. I use a needle oiler. I got this one from Brownells. I think they're available through some of the sewing shops. Since my wife's a quilter, I pretty much know what's in the sewing shops. And you find them or oil bottles like this. And this is very good at precisely putting a drop of oil exactly where you need it. If you feel that your bolt is dry, you can take and you can put a drop of oil right there. One drop. And that is all you need. One drop. Don't drench it, just a drop of oil. Any moving parts, the hinges that will get stale and dry and start maybe getting some rust in them, you can put a drop of oil on those. That's all you need. Do not over oil. Any place that there's a hinge, a pin going through where something has to rotate, that's fine, oil it. But again, very lightly. As far as the bore itself, I would say that unless you're really storing the gun for any length of time, I wouldn't worry too much about it. But if you are, and maybe the season's over and you don't anticipate shooting the gun until next fall, it's going to sit for almost a year, then you can put a few drops of oil on a patch, put a patch through the bore, and put a very, very light coat. Then I would, when I got to the other end and I was going to use the gun again, I put a dry patch down there to take out what's ever left, because the oil sitting in there will pick up dust from the air. So you'll have a dusty bore with an oil base, but just a couple drops of oil is all you need. As far as what oil, as I said, almost anything you find that's marked as a gun oil and many others will work. I've got Mobil 1 sitting over here. The haters are going to hate this, but I use Mobil 1 on most of my guns, mainly because what I have found over time is that the application within a firearm is far less severe than the application in a car engine. A car engine deals with a lot of RPMs, a lot of heat, and the oil has to keep from breaking down over many miles and tens of thousands of revolutions. There's nothing in the gun that is that demanding of oil. So I do use Mobil 1. That's what's in here in that oiler. And as far as what I recommend you use what you're comfortable with. If somebody tells you this is the best oil in the world, just nod your head up and down and say yes. When I was in the business, I used to have people come to me on a regular basis and say, hey, our company just developed a gun oil. And I hated to do it, but I had to look at them and say, what's your advertising plan? Because that market is saturated. And the only way you're going to break into that market with a new oil is if you're going to spend a lot of money to displace somebody else's business. I mean, you get the pie, you're trying to cut that pie into one more piece. If you cut the pie into enough pieces, you no longer have pie, you have crumbs. So somebody's going to drop out the other end. Basically, if you want to develop a new gun oil, you've got to buy a part of the market and take it away from somebody else. There's no new market out there. So anyway, just a few words on gun oils. There's synthetic lubes. There are Belostol, which has been around forever. I use that a lot on black powder. It's a water-soluble oil. And you can, if you shot black powder, you spray that down the bore, use it as a bore cleaner and a preservative. It works okay on smokeless guns too. I just don't think it has the properties to hold up as well as like Mobil 1 or some of the dedicated oils. And old Brownell's Rust Preventative number 2, if you have anything that's stuck or rusty, 4-0 steel will, and Rust Preventative number 2 will clean it up and take it off. These are staples around my shop. I wanted to pick up on handgun cleaning a little bit. This one has obviously been shot at a zombie shoot. Put a lot of rounds through it. It's cleaned the same way the rifle is, so I'm not going to go into big depth on how to clean it up. What you will do more with handguns than you do with rifles, although you can do them with rifles, is to wet a patch and use it to clean up the powder fouling on the outside. And though it's in between the cylinders and on the back, and you want to get all of this good and wet and scrub it down with a brush and get it all clean. Okay, so that's just cleaning it up. The same thing you'll find in your window here. You'll find a lot of powder fouling up at your top strap and your breech. And you want to wipe all that down real good, and if you have to, go ahead and go in there with a brush, a soft brush, and brush it until you get it all clean. Same thing with the barrel. The barrel is done the same way with the brush. One thing you can do is if you shoot a lot of lead and you start getting lead buildup, Dave Manson over at Manson Reamers makes these cylinder reamers. Of course, by caliber. This happens to be a 38 357, and they go in there and you can turn them, well, a handle on them usually, but I already knew this didn't have much buildup in it. But you turn it. Now remember, this is a reamer. If you push hard, you can actually ream that out and end up with a hole that's too big.
All you're trying to get is whatever fouling is.
Right. All you're trying to do is clean out whatever fouling is in that cylinder. And normally I would do this after I had already cleaned the cylinders. But if you look, you will see where I have taken some fouling out of that cylinder. And when you're in something like a cowboy action match where speed and you may have to reload on the clock, you want those cylinders to start out clean so that those shells will fall out after they've been shot. Another thing to do is if you're having problems, the Brownells carries these Flexone polishing systems. These are little tiny abrasive balls on the end of what looks like a brush. You can put that on a drill and lube it, put it in there, and spin it in the cylinder and polish that cylinder so that when you turn it up, the shells just fall out. That's all stuff more for competition than it is for your average shooter, but I thought as long as we were here, we'd talk about it. The biggest problem that guys have that shoot lead bullets is leading within the bore. Some bores lead much more than others. And there is a kit made by, well, several people make them now. For years, the Lewis lead remover was the only thing available. But all the new kits out there by other companies are virtually the same thing. And these, remember when I told you that the only way to get fouling out was either to abrade it, to get under it by penetrating under it, which is what most bore cleaners try and do with lead, or you use an abrasive to sand it. This is a little kit that goes into the muzzle, and you have a small screen, brass screen, that goes on the end here. Put that on our rod, tighten it down good and tight, and there is a nut back here and an expandable rubber bushing. So you put it in there and you simply pull it through your bore, and the lead will embed into the screen, and you just flick it off, tighten it a little more for the next one, take it apart and do the same thing again. You can absolutely de-bore or de-lead a bore in a matter of a few minutes rather than spending hours and hours with a brush. I will say one other thing. Unless you have an extremely difficult case, never use a stainless steel brush. They're too hard. They're hard on the bore. This is rubber backing brass is what's touching the bore. As it comes through, it will pick up the lead and deposit the lead in the pores of the screen. So if you're having problems with lead buildup in any of your guns, as a matter of fact, I've used this in cowboy shooting. I've used this on lever action rifles where I shot all lead bullets and I started getting it. I just, instead of a short rod, I used a regular cleaning rod. Put that screen piece on there, pulled it through the bore, and de-leaded the bore in about 3 passes. I'm sure this has been the longest video of this series, so we're going to call it a day there. This is a quick and dirty, basic cleaning video, that just something that gives you some ideas. I hope I've given you a few things that you hadn't thought of before, like how to de-lead the bore. Just, you know, a few little tips like that that you may not have heard of. And until the next time, this is the old gunsmith for the 45 Alpha Charlie Papa channel saying happy trails. Happy trails to you until we meet again.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.